All right, welcome everyone. I see the number kind of plateauing a bit, so I think it's safe to get started. My name is Eliza Heeks. I'm the Associate Director at the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business, and really excited to have this conversation happening today. As Hannah on the line knows, it's been in the works for a few months now, but we've come to today with a really excellent set of panelists and speakers. So quickly, just a bit about the Center for Sustainable Business. For those of you who might not be familiar, we're an academic center based at NYU Stern School of Business. And our core mission is to help current and future business leaders embed sustainability core to business strategy. Our belief is that this benefits both the bottom line as well as society and the planet. And we conduct this mission through activities in education, career development, research, as well as outreach and engagement. So we host dozens of events just like this each year, and really excited to be wrapping up actually our final week of events with this one. So thanks for joining us today. A quick note on housekeeping: the event will be recorded, so it will be up on our website in the coming week or so if you'd like to take another look at it or share it with your colleagues or peers. And we will run this conversation for about 40 minutes or so, and the last 20 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the event, and we're excited to get that to that stage. So with that, I will let the panelists introduce themselves. Actually, I find that's kind of the best way of doing things. So I'll start us off with Hannah Friedman from Closed Loop Ventures Group, and just a special thank you to her, as the beginning stages of this event really started with Closed Loop and actually a Stern alum there, Renee Paula, who helped get us all connected. So thanks, Hannah, for joining us.
Awesome. Well, Eliza, thank you so much for having me. The thanks is really to the NYU Stern Center for Business. My role at Closed Loop Partners is an investment associate squarely with the Closed Loop Ventures Group team. And we are the earliest direct investment vehicle of a larger investment platform and innovation center dedicated to the circular economy. So I also have the immense privilege of working with Bobby. Algramo is one of the portfolio companies of Closed Loop Ventures, just for full transparency there. And of course, LimeLoop and Chantal's work are kind of one of the best in class solutions that we've seen across the space. So it's a great privilege to speak to some of the trends and things that we see from my role, where I help manage the pipeline, do deal diligence and some sourcing around innovative and early stage companies in the circular economy. We look across the sectors of plastics and packaging, food and agriculture, fashion and beauty, as well as supply chain logistics and tech. And we're really hunting for investment opportunities, not only seeking environmental and social impact, but also return and the financials underpinning it. So we are the earliest equity piece in this investment ecosystem, and across our platform, we are also investing debt into recycling infrastructure in the US and North American markets. We are also investing out of a growth equity strategy for fashion and beauty specifically. And we have, last but not least, a private equity fund that is taking those control positions in the best-in-class operators across the circular economy. So really spanning the capital stack, recognizing that different companies have different capital needs. And last but not least, we put forward research and analysis out of our innovation center, and kind of think of it as getting pre-investment grade solutions up to market readiness. That's a little bit about Closed Loop Partners, and it's a real privilege to be here with you all today.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Chantal, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Echoing, thank you so much for having us and for having this really important conversation. Hey everyone, my name is Chantal Emmanuel, the CTO and Co-Founder of LimeLoop. At LimeLoop, we make reusable smart packaging. So essentially, think of all those packages, especially with everything that's going on with COVID, piling up at your doorstep. We launched in 2018 and really thought there was no reason that a t-shirt that you have coming to you should live in a package that's going to last forever in a landfill. So we have created a fleet of reusable packaging that is used for anything from clothing to food and anything that can be delivered, as well as the technology to go along with it. So not only does our packaging last over 200 uses, but we leverage software and hardware technology to learn more about what's going on in and around the package to create a more enjoyable experience for everyone.
Thanks so much, Chantal. Bobby?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. Very happy to be here and share what we're doing with Algramo. So my name is Bobby Gaafar. I'm the head of North America with Algramo. And Algramo started in Chile, Santiago, Chile, roughly about 7 years ago, basically tackling within lower income areas, something called the poverty tax, which I'm sure most are familiar with. And the idea started basically in bodegas, letting people purchase rice and beans of all things in reusable plastic containers. And by doing so, people were able to buy rice and beans and also powdered laundry detergent for upwards of 40% compared to what they would typically purchase at a local bodega. And so the idea kind of grew from there into laundry detergent, to electric tricycles that drive around Santiago, Chile, that are very cool and do home delivery. And thanks to Closed Loop Partners as a key partner, with wanting to bring the concept to the States. So they came and recruited me to come and run the company within the US and in Canada markets. And so we started our pilot back in August. We partnered with the Clorox company and Colgate as well. And we started selling Clorox Specialist Bleach as well as Pine Sol and soft soap, hand soap. And the idea is basically to put our smart reusable systems, which are stationary machines, within laundromats, Essex Market, which is a large food market in the Lower East Side, as well as a commercial building in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Building 77. And we allow people to come back and actually reuse their packaging. And so this is actually existing packaging, like a Clorox bottle or a soft soap bottle. And on each bottle, we have something called our Smart Tag, which is an RFID tag, very similar to what you use to get into like an office building. And so what that does is it actually allows you to tag your email address or your phone number to that bottle, and it makes the bottle smart. And so by bringing back that bottle, you're able to save upwards of 20 to 40% on the cost. So instead of spending $5 on the bottle of bleach, you spend $2. And the reason for that very, very quickly is because 40% of the bottle is typically spent on the plastic. And so we're able to pass those savings along to people. So the pilot's been going great. We're onboarding some exciting brands over the next couple of months. And very quickly, on my background, serial entrepreneur for the past 15, 16 years. I started a digital marketing agency that sold device media a few years back, gone to do a couple of tech startups, and was most recently an entrepreneur in residence at ZX Ventures, which is Anheuser-Busch InBev's innovation and venture capital arm, where I worked on a very cool vending machine there.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. We're really happy to have you here. And you've planted some really exciting teasers there that I'm looking forward to digging into throughout the conversation. But just to start, this question, we'll start with Hannah, and wondering if you could provide, for those of us on the call who aren't super familiar with the circular economy and all the technology behind it, if you could describe in layman's terms, what is the circular economy and what does it look like across industries, of course, with a focus in the packaging industry here. And why are we seeing in the news more and more recently? What are the enabling conditions that are making the trends happen right now?
Absolutely. I can definitely speak in layman's terms because I think everyone attending this webinar will actually find this much more intuitive than you would expect. It's certainly not rocket science, but one way I like to define the circular economy is by what it is not. And it is not this linear system that we have today where we're extracting raw materials, we're using them for very short lifespans, often single-use applications, and then disposing of them in landfill. And missing out on the value of those materials that we spent all of this energy and all of these resources extracting and distributing through our system. And so that linear make, take, and then waste system is something that I think most people would recognize as pretty economically inefficient, but also exceptionally environmentally degrading, because we all kind of have seen that straw come out of the turtle's nose. And I think there's a rising understanding that not only should we absolutely be stopping a lot of these plastics and pollutants ending up in unmanaged scenarios like our waterways, but that even going to landfill is not good enough, and that we should expect better from the circulation of our materials and our resources. So the circular economy is really conceptualizing that move into the future in which materials are circulated at their highest value for as long as possible, and that the benefits of the system are more equitably distributed, and that we can totally reimagine the way that we produce and consume products. So this concept of the circular economy really spans sectors. And I laid out the sectors that we invest in. Of course, plastics packaging, food, fashion, and even supply chains have circular economy tenets within them that you can think through. But more so, and I think what's helpful as we define the circular economy, you can have circular interventions at any point of the value chain. And that includes everything from the materials themselves, designing new and better materials that may be from bio-based feedstocks or more regenerative feedstocks. We could also be thinking about the design of products and moving towards monomateriality and thinking about, what's going to happen to this piece of package or what's going to happen to this product at its end of life and changing our design of those products. We can also think about, optimizing our manufacturing. We can think about optimizing our distribution and the logistics of getting materials to the point of retail. We can think about changing the relationship of the retailer with the consumer. And I think obviously Algramo is a huge part of that. We can think about new modes, right? LimeLoop is incredibly influential for e-commerce and the rise of how consumers are now engaging with the kind of digital consumption. And then at the end of life, which is maybe where a lot of circular economy gets pigeonholed, is that recycling and the processes that bring materials back into play is an incredibly overlooked segment that we think is going to be very exciting, and of course have been investing against it. So there's everything from the collection from the consumer's hands through the sortation and the processing of those materials, whether that's plastics, paper, metal, glass, or whether that's also organics and the rise of composting and bringing those materials even into the earth to then provide soil conditioner and fertilizer for the food that we will grow. So really it spans sectors, the circular economy spans the value chain, and we think that's really exciting. To speak to the trends that are driving the transition from linear to circular, we see it happening in a few different ways, but really the consumer drives so much of the demand. Right? Consumers are demanding better practices from the brands and products that they are purchasing. And that is driving corporate action. Corporates who actually have set many internal strategies around sustainability, around sourcing, around the recycling and recoverability of their products. And so those commitments in the market, maybe that's a 2030 or a 2050 goal of various sorts, those all have real implications on how these businesses are thinking about their strategies. And so it's a mix of consumer pressure, corporate action, and last but not least, pending regulation. We see that a few progressive states have, whether they've enacted or are considering legislation to ban certain formats of packaging. We see that as something that we don't necessarily need to transition to a circular economy, but is certainly driving an acceleration of the transition. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Eliza.
Thanks so much, really helpful. And I see somebody's having trouble with sound, and yes, we will be sending out a recording of the event afterwards. But Hannah, really great kind of definition setting and context setting. And I think we feel ready to move into kind of more specific initiatives now. And I know this is the question that came to my mind as we were exploring putting this panel on really since the start of the school year, so last fall, and the question of how do we keep the progress with the circular economy and reusing our goods and recycling our goods in a world in which COVID-19 has made us really aware of where the things we touch have been, and washing our hands and cleaning, and so this panel was a really interesting timing for us. And so with that, I'm curious, and maybe we can start with Bobby. I know you mentioned this in your introduction. You launched in the middle of the pandemic with a kind of cleaning products container. So I think, could you speak to that a little bit and how that went for you?
Sure. So we actually launched over the Labor Day weekend within a laundromat in Bed-Stuy. And personally, I basically lived in a laundromat for about 30 days straight just to learn about, how people interact with the machine and what type of questions they have. And during that time, what we learned is that obviously people were tightening their wallets a bit. Unemployment was, increasing. People are looking for other ways to save money. Obviously, e-commerce was exploding as well, with people not wanting to really make purchases in person. And so for us, it was a benefit, our value proposition of being able to sell kind of an everyday, product to somebody, especially bleach and Pine Sol as disinfectants, where they were actually able to, buy it at a 40% reduction compared to, typical retail sales. It was a huge positive, right? And the second point is that, it is a vending machine, and it's as close to as kind of touchless and avoidance of a large crowd of people, compared to going to Target to make your purchase. And so kind of, testing this all out, it performed much better than we ever thought. We've seen close to a 40% reuse rate on the packaging, which is kind of like our golden metric, and prove that people are actually willing to continue to come back even during the pandemic as cases started to rise as well. So it was extremely encouraging. It will continue to be extremely interesting on the types of products that we continue to roll out in disinfectant and home care cleaning products as well. So I think, in terms of kind of launching during the rise of cases and stuff, it went much better than we expected.
Thanks so much. Really exciting. And that laundromat, I think, is nearby my apartment. So we'll have to, is it still running?
Still running, but you won't catch me there. So
that's good to hear. I'm glad you're not sleeping there anymore.
No.
Great, thanks, Bobby. And Chantal, wondering if you can speak to how LimeLoop saw people kind of changing the way they consume and discard.
Yeah, no, a pandemic is definitely an interesting time to be involved in reusable e-commerce packaging, as you can imagine. We saw sanitization from a different side than Bobby, in that, if you remember back to the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all wiping down everything frivolously when we came to our house and changing our clothes and not really sure how the virus was spread or how or where, or if surfaces were the kind of conduit for that. And so we got a lot of questions around that. And for us, being in reusability is really sort of an opportunity to really teach people about our practices and what went into it long before COVID hit, and what will continue to be part of it, which is that everything gets cleaned between each cycle. And if you remember, even a lot of stores that were doing reusable bags stopped allowing people to bring reusable bags into the grocery store. So luckily that kind of initial fear has died down. But from that, of course, has seen this massive growth in e-commerce. And so stores that thought they were going to see the type of sales they have now, but they were going to have them in 2030 and beyond, are now dealing with a lot of the challenges that come with having, 100% day over day, sometimes sale goals growth. And that's sort of in a couple of ways. So of course, when you have more orders, you have more returns, and reverse logistics was a struggle for folks long before the COVID. And then with COVID became that much more exacerbated. And of course, being in reusable packaging is this new opportunity for us to say, we are the packages that gets the goods from point A to point B, and can also, if they need to be, get back to point A. And so suddenly you stop having people looking around for secondary packaging to return things. It's all right there. Of course, on the sustainability side, along with those sale goals hitting numbers that were expected in 2030, those sustainability goals had to speed up also. And so when you just look at like the Targets of the world and the Amazons of the world, who are just flooding folks home with packaging all of a sudden because it's the only way to get goods for a long time, they now have to look at themselves and say, what can we do to stop what this is doing to the environment? And not only from the point of view of the environment, but from the experiential side of view, from the consumers who are just fed up with it as well. And so it really shifted the conversations where we're no longer the ones kind of knocking on the door saying like, hey guys, like we need to take a look at this, we need to tackle these problems. It really flipped itself to folks coming to us and saying, we have an issue here, we want to solve it, what can we do? Can we do this together? And one of the really amazing things that I noticed was that a lot of the brands who were just starting out, so folks who were just starting their own e-commerce businesses, looking whether they were looking for something new from the pandemic or planning to already, were coming to us saying we want to be sustainable from day one. And so there's a really great shift in people's mind from not that we want to wait till there's a problem and solve it. We want this to be a part of our pillar from the very beginning, and want to look to you guys as a way to do that. So it's been a really great kind of shift in that narrative as we've moved along through the year.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. It's so interesting hearing about the e-commerce. I've felt the online shopping trends really increase in my community, but what's also funny is I've noticed a lot more kind of community engagement in terms of the amount of clothing and items that are being circulated around communities too. So it's interesting that it's kind of moved in these two separate directions. And I think, so anyway, just an anecdote from me, but it's good to see that it's resulting in some kind of positive developments and these really innovative business models. With that, I want to look to Hannah to just wrap up this question, and this was slightly unplanned, but I think our center gets a lot of questions in the last year or so about how we find companies and investors are thinking about sustainability now that public health, social justice, and racial justice are kind of have taken really a front seat in the media and in foundations and nonprofits' minds over the last year. And I'm wondering if, from the investor perspective, Hannah, you can speak to how your investing companies or how others you're speaking with are thinking about how to continue raising enough money, and if that's even really a concern for companies that are thinking about sustainability and maybe don't have social and health issues at the forefront of their models.
Certainly. So, in fact, there was a period after the pandemic in which, and then shortly followed on the heels of a total racial reckoning in the country, right, with the death of George Floyd and too many others. There was a moment in which investors really kind of put the brakes on things and had to check the cash positions of their portfolio, and also take a deep, long internal look at some of their hiring practices, their investing practices, how they're tracking DE&I metrics. I think we certainly saw all of that happen in the market, and maybe there were some initial reactions from investors, but shortly following that, the markets rebounded quite quickly. And so I don't work in public equities. I'm not going to speak to the market as a whole here, but what I will say is that investors generally started moving forward quite quickly, and thinking deeply about what they learned from the pandemic and what they learned from the summer of 2020 and the cries for racial justice. So with that, when you see large physical shocks to the system, you kind of get a catalyst for change, which we're hopeful will be systemic and long lasting. So I think that holds true not only in sustainability strategies and DE&I strategies, both within companies themselves, but also within the investor face and their investment strategies. So I'm hopeful about those trajectories, and I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities as we move forward and rebuild collectively.
Great, thanks. I like that perspective. So moving, this is kind of a similar question, and maybe Hannah, I'll have you set the stage again, but thinking about the next 5 to 10 years, and what the challenges and opportunities are for achieving more sustainable production and consumption, whether they be technical, financing, which you kind of just addressed, consumer behavior, regulatory, which is also on people's minds right now. So what are those trends, challenges, and opportunities that you see happening over the next half or full decade?
Certainly. So, speaking to these physical shocks to the system and speaking to these transitions that I think corporates, investors, and entrepreneurs encountered, it would have been very easy to abandon some of these sustainability strategies. And I think that would have been a total missed opportunity. And in fact, we saw the opposite. We saw a doubling down on these sustainability strategies, and we saw an integration of social justice, environmental impact, and good business in a way that maybe we weren't treating as integrated and intersectional as they should have been. And so what I'm really excited about as an opportunity is that we are going to encounter more of these challenges to the system. We're going to increasingly see climate-related disasters from natural weather events, from climate events. We're going to continue to have these physical shocks to the systems, let alone geopolitical shocks, right, with trade wars and things. So in that context, those will be very real challenges that even our best models will not be capable of predicting. And so we will, I think, in the face of that, find opportunity in building business from the ground up in a way that accounts for all of this intersectional impact. And I think that's kind of the opportunity when we think about the technical financial consumer behavior and regulatory changes alongside that. I think what's really exciting is that it is a transition. And when we speak about the circular economy and what the innovators in front of you can attest to is that it doesn't happen overnight. There is both value in the incremental changes of moving the needle from 1 to 2 tonight. And then there is also value in looking beyond that and saying like, yes, this is how we're going to get to 5 through 10. And so I think that there is change that's needed across the system to bring in all of these impacts together, to tie them together, and to both make and shoot for incremental change as well as the kind of systemic and step change that we need to see.
Thanks, Hannah. So turning to you, Bobby, I wonder if you could kind of pick up where Hannah left off and talk about your perspectives on the next 5 to 10 years from Algramo and your line of business.
Sure. It's definitely consumer behavior. And so when you take a step back and look at what we're trying to do, we're really trying to change consumer behavior. And, people are not used to reusing packaging at all. We've certainly made the transition from plastic bags to reusable bags. But I would like to think the catalyst for that was just municipalities passing laws, kind of forcing that change. And so on our part, I would love for laws to be passed to reuse packaging. It'd be great for us, but probably a long ways, if not, never happening. So from our standpoint, it's really trying to figure out how to change people's behavior to reuse their packaging and how to incentivize them. And, for us, it's been the savings component is really that's where the light bulb goes off for consumers. When you have 3 seconds to sell bleach, in essence, it's, why would you use our system compared to buying it where you typically buy it? Because you save money. And then after that, it's the convenience factor as well. Where else can I buy? What else can I buy? And then the third point is obviously zero waste sustainability. And so I think approaching it from that, standpoint, I think we're positioned very well. It's certainly going to be an uphill battle to change, consumers' behavior. Obviously what LimeLoop is doing, I think there's going to be other great startups that come along the way that kind of lead the charge as well. But certainly, what type of products do we add? Where do we add them is certainly important. We think residential buildings are a terrific opportunity for us. So for example, 10,000, 11 plus units in Manhattan alone, which are equal to roughly over 500,000 people, are all potential retail locations for us. And so by doing that, it gives us an opportunity to let these brands go direct to consumer, which they typically do not do. And also it allows us to kind of elevate the convenience factor, right? So if you need to do your laundry at 11 o'clock at night and you don't want to go outside when it's 30 degrees to go get your bottle of detergent, you could just go downstairs and get it. And so, going to markets like that, buildings, college campuses, laundromats, and so forth, it's really just getting closer to the consumer to help kind of expedite that behavioral change.
Great, thanks. And we'll get back to the savings theme and the next question. So appreciate you leading us into that. But Chantal, what do you see in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, definitely echoing both Hannah and Bobby's points around that. In addition, we also look at kind of the changing ecosystems, specifically around, delivery and supply chain, as well as waste management. So on the delivery and supply chain, we already know things like drones and autonomous vehicles that are not that far off in the future. So really asking ourselves, what does a world look like, especially around packaging, in a world where people are not as involved in the handling anymore? And do we need packaging anymore? We would love to actually work our way out of the systems as far as packaging and focus more on the efficiency and the technology of getting things to you as sustainably and efficiently as possible. So we really prepare ourselves for that, and think that's a really important question to ask. Going back to that point of something's getting transported to you in a couple of hours, why does the package it comes in have to live forever? And then on the waste management side, especially taking a look at where we are today, anecdotally, I just moved and had to set up my garbage, and the smallest bin they offered was fit 5 bags a week. I'm like, why does anyone need 5 garbage bags a week? But we as Americans are producing 5.9 pounds of garbage every single day. And that's just not sustainable. And to your point about things being shared within the community, because we're recognizing that we're accumulating way too much things. And so I think what I would love to see, and this might be more wistful, is really change that paradigm of the reduce, reuse, recycle, and not having it an equal triangle, but it really is a hierarchy that starts with reduction. It starts with less consumption. And one of our brands, Upchoose, the founder, put it really well basically their company is upcycling children's clothing. So your kid wears it for a month, they send it back, they get a new month's worth of clothes, and those first months go on to a younger child. And he said, and I think Bobby's kind of similar in this boat, they're solving the problem of clothing children, not selling clothes to parents. So let's solve the actual problems we're trying to solve. Let's clean clothes with detergent, not by buying a bunch of water. Let's clothe our children with the right amount of clothing that we need, not an over-inundated amount of it. So once we get back to that, I think we're going to find ourselves savings a lot. And then I would love to see a world where the garbage bins get really small. We have a slightly smaller recycling bin, or we're actually recycling what goes into it. We have a much larger compost bin, and then we add to that a reusable bin where the Algramo's cans go into it and our bags go into it, and maybe your coffee mugs go into it, and they get cleaned and put back into the cycle. And we really change the way that we do things and realize we don't have to be stuck in the current patterns that we have right now.
Yeah, what a world to imagine. And I want to pick up on something you said for the next question is the idea of kind of working ourselves out of business. So as packaging innovators on the line here, imagining a world without packaging. And that brings me to my next question is, what is the business case for shifting to this more circular model of production and consumption? And aside from the fear of working themselves out of business, where can companies look to gain value across their business model by investing in these circular innovations? And I think let's go to Bobby. I remember you have kind of an interesting anecdote about a company that you partnered with recently.
Yeah. So I think, starting from the top, I think if you look at kind of like the top 50 CPGs globally, they all have zero waste and net zero emission goals in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think from a timing standpoint, it aligns perfectly for us, for us to pursue this opportunity. And so, specifically, with these larger companies, the packaging is a cost center to them. So that's the raw materials for the plastic, that's the operations to warehouse it, logistics is centered around and so forth. And so, I had a meeting a few weeks ago with a very well-known CPG. And, as part of the meeting that stuck with me, it was that, they said, we make money selling the juice. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do, right? And so we're trying to sell the juice, we're trying to sell the liquid. That, the bottle itself, as I stated earlier, it's 40% of the cost, single-use packaging. So when you go to the store, 40% of that $5 is going right to that plastic bottle. And these plastic containers, they are made to be reused. We just don't reuse them. And so that's what we're trying, that's the difference that we're trying to make. And then obviously, as I stated earlier, with the 40% reuse rate, it seems that people are, starting to catch on. But I think, with our operations and the overall concept, it seems like a simple concept, but it's actually very difficult to scale and get right in terms of, what locations we put the units in, what type of products we offer and so forth. But the brands that we're working with directly will be rolling out soon. And, just speaking with in the future, they see the value in that. But it's certainly going to take time to get, to that true margin increase for them to be able to remove, this cost center element, out of the equation.
Thanks so much, Chantal. What do you see as the business case for your company and others like it?
Yeah, so we kind of break it down twofold. One is on the cost saving side and the other is on the value added side. So on the cost saving side, similarly, because it's reusable packaging, we see anywhere from cost neutral to 40% savings package to packaging for our brands. And to break that down a little further, for our small, medium businesses, it's a monthly subscription. So you pay a flat rate for the package per month, no matter how many uses it gets out of it. So it's really similar to them in how they're used to paying for package already. And additionally, it encourages the behavior around, let's get this packaging as quickly as possible, because the more we can use it, the more economical it becomes. And so we become really great partners in speeding up and making that process easier. And then for our enterprise companies, they're able to buy the packages outright. And so going back to mentioning that our packages last over 200 uses. So you can imagine that works out to cents per trips for our large enterprise. enterprise companies. And then on the value added side, we look at that twofold. We're already seeing numbers around the engagement and the sales going up for companies once they switch over. And if you think about it very logically, if you're a consumer and you have the option, and you have the option to order from someone who's going to send it in a reusable package versus having another pile added onto your box, you're going to go with that brand. And then when you add in the technology, especially around the sensor technology for groceries, being able to know what the temperature inside the packages where the packages at any given time, so you're not relying on things like the tracking number to kind of tell you that it's out for delivery perpetually. And to be able to add that value back into it has been another bonus that's we're only able to leverage because it's a reusable package, right? Like you're not going to put a sensor into a package that's going into the garbage after one use. So it's that sustainability aspect of it. It actually opens up a lot of avenues for us to increase that experience on both sides.
Yeah, so interesting, especially the different answers that come out even from two companies that are in such similar industries. I also wanted to share an anecdote from our center. Actually, I won't spend too much time on it because we can follow up with some information, but the research team at the Center for Sustainable Business recently wrapped up a project on sustainable apparel funded by HSBC in partnership with Reformation, REI, and Eileen Fisher. And we published a case working with Eileen Fisher about their Renew program that I'm sure many of you on the call are familiar with, and identified over $1 million in benefits just coming from their Renew program that's derived from things like earned media generated due to the visibility of the program, the profit that's coming from it, the customer acquisition value that comes from having a program that's kind of really about the customer use and brings mission aligned customers to the stores. And also just of course, the profits from people buying their products again, not just the first time. So really interesting way of thinking about the benefits that are coming from investing in circular and sustainable models like this. So to bring us home on this question, I'll turn back to Hannah. Could you fill any gaps that we might have missed about what type of business case you see for circular economy?
No, I think my colleagues and the Stern case study there really highlight a lot of those opportunities well. And maybe I can add in some color around a few segments we didn't touch on, but still related to packaging. I think looking at the cost savings and the revenue opportunities associated with these models very much speak to the value proposition of these businesses for the customers that they serve. I think as investors, we also look at larger models that can fundamentally create new business operations in kind of white spaces, but also do impact the bottom line of these larger corporates at play and players around. And so maybe I'll give one example from supply chain. Of course, supply chain supporting packaging flowing through the system, and then maybe even one in food, because food requires a tremendous amount of packaging. So, when we look at the value chains, and Chantal touched on this, digitizing those packages in the supply chain and even digitizing the production can help move the system towards more circularity, right? Localizing manufacturing, because you now know where it comes from, actually helps reduce the emissions, eliminate the total miles traveled, and it creates a level of transparency that can help disintermediate inefficient and suboptimal supply chains. So that happens in packaging and other industries, but maybe one example of business opportunity that we see from the circular economy and investor lens. And the other would be from, and sorry, my lights are on a timer, so I'm really living my values here and getting shut off in the dark. But maybe my other example here is about kind of food. And I think LimeLoop does a great example of demonstrating opportunities of reverse logistics. And there's also a lot of that in entire categories around food. So we've put forward some work on, what happens when we start shifting toward compostable alternatives for our packaging. And we've identified that, you really can't have that done sustainably until you are increasing the collection and the processing infrastructure that can then take a compostable package and turn it into usable compost for the system. Otherwise, you're just contributing to more landfill with like a prettier name and maybe a greener label. So we think that there's lots of opportunities in that side of the the sector as well. This back end, the logistics, the hauling, the processing, those operations that we have in our portfolio, and of course we see as kind of white spaces for investment. So maybe that's a helpful perspective just on its head of the investor lens.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of wrapping up. Something that we like to say at the center is sustainable business is just good business. It's just good management. So it's a little cheesy, but I think Hannah, to kind of echo what you're saying, is if circular economy brings a business leadership more in touch with their supply chain and brings more transparency and trust to suppliers and better materials, then of course that's going to result in better business and better profit. So really appreciate ending on that note. So I want to save plenty of time for questions. I know we have a few, but I really like ending with a really short, simple question, just by the nature of us being at a school, and I can see quite a few students and alumni on the line here. I'd like just 30 seconds to a minute from each of you with maybe one piece of advice, insights for the students or professionals in our audience who might be looking to contribute to a circular economy initiative or company. What types of skills, concepts, frameworks are important to understand, resources to go to, really just any kind of closing words of wisdom before we move to Q&A. So Bobby, I'll turn to you.
Sure. So for me, like I took an untraditional route, double major in finance and entrepreneurship. So I would say definitely get an internship. You're going to learn very quickly whether you love like this particular line of work or you don't. So for me, I did an internship in Wall Street, liked it, didn't love it. Additionally, go seek out companies in whatever, whether it's startups or established companies, follow them on Twitter. Don't be afraid to cold email, cold call them. You have to try something different. If you're just applying to like a job description on a website, you're just going to get lost among the other 300, 500 people that apply as well.
Appreciate that. And also a good place for me to plug that our center has really excellent career resources, and we run our own job board actually for NYU students and alumni who are interested in careers in sustainability and circular economy. So please feel free to reach out to me after this call if you need any help finding an internship. Chantal?
Yeah, so back when I used to do these in person, way back when, the question I would get a lot at the end of it is, how do I get involved in circular economy, or how do I get involved in sustainability? And my question back was always, what do you like to do, or what are you interested in working on? Because the thing is that we need people in all of those fields in circular economy also. So lawyers, accountants, all of the different roles that you could think of, obviously in any other sector, apply to this. And similar to Bobby, I have a non-traditional background. I'm coming at it as a software engineer. And so it's not really the conventional route for a software engineer, but it's a conventional route for anyone who loves problem solving, because there's a lot of really meaty problems, as we talked about today, that need really smart people. And then on the shameless plug side of things, we are hiring in both growth and engineering. So check us out.
Thanks so much. We'll have to get that job posting from you to put onto our job board and share with the Stern community. And Hannah.
Awesome. Well, I would certainly plug both of these companies. You should reach out to them if you're interested. But I also think there are very few experts in the circular economy, right? It's nearly an impossible and an oxymoronic term. You have to be kind of working in it because it is an evolving space. And so I would just say, get out there and try to gain as much exposure as you can. And as Chantal said, kind of hone in on your unique, value sets and your unique skills. And I try to apply the same tenets to my career as those qualities that I may look for in the entrepreneurs we back from Closed Loop, and that would be hunger and humility. So I think that those are maybe my words of wisdom for the group.
Thank you so much. What a full conversation. I feel like I'm like out of breath kind of just because we ran through so much in 45 minutes. So excited now to turn to questions. I see we already have 6 in the Q&A section. So just another reminder of housekeeping is if you've put your question in the chat or if you're raising your hand, please direct your question to the Q&A because that's where I'll be looking. It's just easier to see everything in one place. So our first question submitted rather early on in the event is, what is your take on how entrenched interests, for example, big oil, which produces plastic, will either resist the transition from make, take, waste to circular, or to co-opt the message, but try to shift the focus from renewable compostable substitutes to enhance recycling infrastructure, or pushing the responsibility to recycle to consumers, which of course we do know has happened in the past. So is there one of you that might want to take that big question on?
I will volunteer as tribute here.
Great.
My very smart panelists can join in as needed. So it is certainly a big question. And I think I'm not going to really speak to the embedded interests of big oil. I think that I don't speak on behalf of those companies at all. But what I will say is that, recycling is good business, and that's part of the thesis that we are putting forward. And a lot of people are working on not allowing the message of what is renewable and compostable or what is truly recyclable to be co-opted. And lots of great people are working on exactly that topic. And so when we think about, the way that recycling has played out over time, and the way that even some of those geopolitical forces like China and other Southeast Asian countries saying, no, we are not going to take your plastics, your recyclables in late 2017, we actually saw investment starting to happen from Chinese companies in recycling infrastructure in the US market, which means that there was kind of this bet behind our ability to improve the purity of those bales and truly capture the value of those commodities. Plastics included. And so what we do see is that the large interests of the folks who are buying plastics, right? These are the large CPG companies, beverage companies, Unilever, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Amazon, P&G, and these are partners of Closed Loop Partners. They are putting forward, again, those recycled content goals in the market by 2030, by 2050, and they are looking to the market with a dearth of supply for the grades of recycled resin that they need. So I think there's real opportunity there in an industry that has strong business, and it is those business tenets that will stand up this industry.
Thanks so much for taking that one. I'm sure we could all speak to that at length, but I'd like to move on to the next questions because we have so many coming in. So this one is from John Fox, specifically for Bobby. How do you see the potential for growth in this form of service to grocery stores becoming a standard? Is the vision to have an Algramo machine at the front of every store, like a red box machine, et cetera, is the norm today? What is the incentive for the grocery chains to adopt?
Certainly. I mean, I've spoken to many big box stores, grocery chains, and just kind of general stores. Our team in Santiago, Chile is actually running a pilot right now with Walmart down there. That's actually going very well. And so in terms of kind of the value proposition for these stores, it's very straightforward. We can take basically our machine, the amount of product that we sell is comparable or even more compared to the product that's actually sitting on their shelves, and also increase the store's margins in a very fun and exciting way to do that, as well as also selling their own private label products too. And so that's what the brands are very excited about. Same thing as the CPGs with these 5 to 10 year zero waste goals. The retail stores have those as well. And so we're certainly engaged. I think probably by the end of this year, I'm hoping we'll probably run a pilot in the States with a known brand in retail space.
Great, thanks. Looking forward to that day. I see red box machines now and I get kind of sad just because I don't know if anybody has the ability to actually use them. But I know that won't be the case for Algramo. So moving on, we have a question. How do you see other sustainability considerations incorporated in the circular economy? For example, toxic chemicals for sanitizing reusable packaging. How about human rights violations and recycling sorting facilities, especially in developing countries?
Yeah, happy to jump in here. Since when we started LimeLoop, before we even launched the product, we did an initial LCA to make sure that when we took a look at, what was going into making our packages, to getting them here to the States, to transporting them back and forth from the store to the consumer and back to the store, it really was a better alternative. And we learned a lot of things, obviously that it was, but also that the system of doing LCAs and finding this information is pretty broken and definitely needs a lot of development. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially to be able to put, I know that Stern is doing a lot of work around this. How do you put the numbers behind these behaviors so that even with well intent that we're making sure that we're able to actually measure that and continuing to improve on those processes. So I think personally for us, what that looks like is really to the point of the question is looking at every single point at which we're touching products, we're bringing things in, whether it's people picking it up or to the point about cleaning, what's happening at every single step, and making sure that we're doing the best that we can to make sure that that's as sustainable as possible going forward.
Excellent, thanks, Chantal. And I think back to reconnecting this to a point that we discussed earlier, I think that business model and that due diligence and that attention to detail is also what helps avoid, kind of mitigate risk for any type of supply chain issues or human rights issues in the future, which I think also kind of adds to the business case and adds to peace of mind, I'm sure.
Exactly, yeah, and to add to that, a lot of the things consumers are doing around demanding transparency is amazing too, because it doesn't let you hide behind anything, of course, and you really have to own every part of your process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have another question that's a little long, but I'll read it out loud. How do you balance the negatives of single-use plastics in the food chain, for example, with the positives of reducing food waste? We already have significant levels of food waste. It would be worse if we eliminated single-use plastics. We're going to have more people to feed and more stress on food production. Eliminating single-use plastics will make that situation worse. What to do?
What to do, indeed. I'm happy to take that question, but of course, my colleagues can jump in. And I take this question because I think this is a really apt question. It does a great job of highlighting the trade-offs between having single-use plastics and packaging and other sustainability goals, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And so in fact, Closed Loop Ventures has invested in another company called Mori, and Mori is actually a silk-based protein coating that is totally edible, colorless, odorless. Like you can put it on meats, you can put it on your avocados, you can put it on your chopped salads. It's a really wonderful and flexible material science innovation that helps do the work that packaging was intended to do, which is create an oxidization barrier and prevent moisture leaking out of our produce and our food, and reduce the microbial activity which can cause the infections in meat or other bacteria outbreaks. And so, there are ways that we can bring technology along with us and invest in those opportunities in order to solve for these key challenges, which is something Chantal said so well, right? Like we want to solve for shelf life, but we don't need plastic as the only solution to that problem. And so I think there's many ways to answer the question of what to do, requiring more plastic is not the only answer there. So I hope Mori is a helpful case study of what the future might look like.
Yeah, super interesting. And we actually, one of the questions that just popped up is if you could repeat the name of the silk. So maybe you can drop it into the chat so people can see, and we can also include a link to it in our follow-up if that's helpful. Great. So I'm gonna move on to somebody who's asking a question for the first time. Sri, I love this question. I love the concept of 40% in savings by reducing or eliminating packaging, but part of the reason why packaging is so important is because it can be eye-catching and help increase sales. Good for, especially for elastic goods, especially for CPG companies. How does Algramo convince CPG companies that reduction in packaging will not lead to reduction in off-the-shelf sales? And I imagine this could be applicable to LimeLoop too. I mean, just in all the packaging we see on the sidewalks as its own marketing. So I'd love to hear from both of you.
Sure, it's a good question. It's definitely I wouldn't necessarily say a concern, but it's a matter of kind of figuring out that answer as we go with the brands that we're working with. But certainly, they want to make sure that they're not cannibalizing existing sales channels with the products. And so that's where the reuse rate comes in. And so by consumers actually coming back and reusing their existing packaging, like we've had some super users that have reused their packaging 6 to 7 times already, which has had kind of a plus 20% on margin for one of our brands. And so that's really kind of the secret sauce in this for brands. And so kind of going back to the cost center, point that I brought up earlier, it's that, by them being able to sell more, let's say just more bleach, they're saving all of those expenses on the raw materials, operations, and logistics as well. And so that's really the value proposition here. And so, if we're able to continue to increase that, certainly with new products that we're onboarding in the future, the pitch will become even easier for brands to continue to join us. So.
And then on the LimeLoop side, the question around branding comes up pretty often. And what we usually say back is, if you stop and think about why do you want to brand the box and why are you used to branding the box? And it's usually to make a statement and to kind of set yourself apart. And we like to people, there's no greater statement than switching to reusable packaging. So just the very nature of doing that says more than any giant logo can say. And then on the practical side, our goal is once we have a large enough network of companies within our system is not sending the shippers back to the company that it came from, but to the closest place of need. So if I'm here in New York and I order something from California, there's no reason that package go all the way back to California when we have a New York brand that needs it. And so by keeping an agnostic package, it allows us to all share within the same network of packaging instead of pulling it out of the system and making it just one company's.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you both. So let's see, we have 2 more questions left. Let's see if we can get through them, but maybe not. I'll go to the next one. Does a company that decides to go in the direction of circular economy require new staff positions or new kind of managers? Do you think that we are going to see something like chief circularity officer? Hannah, I wonder, since you work with so many of these companies, what type of staffing do you see as they grow?
Sure. Well, Anli, I would love to see you trailblaze a chief circularity officer. I think that would be a fantastic role to create for yourself. And I would encourage that. And of course, companies are at many different stages in their journey towards circularity. Of course, for entrepreneurs like those on the call, you can really embed circular economy practices at the fundament of the business. And that's the opportunity that we were speaking to today. For the larger incumbent businesses and industry players, that change has to be, working alongside strategy and working alongside finance offices and supply chain. Like there is a transition to happen and a bit of a slower. So we do see chief sustainability officers who are managing things that are maybe more broad than just circular economy, but that includes climate goals, that includes renewable energy goals, topics we haven't even touched on at all today, but are core here. And so I think it would be fantastic to see circularity play a larger part of that role, but it is part of the narrative in the sustainability strategies we see out there for those larger corporate players.
Yeah, great answer. And I just want to echo, and this is a good note to end on. I know it's 6 o'clock here on the dot, but I think this is something we share with students as well. Students who want to go into sustainability, want to go into social impact, and are having trouble finding those entry-level jobs or the jobs on the market that include sustainability and social impact in the title or in the top line of the job description. And what we say is that it's a mindset, it's a lens that you bring to anything you do. So a few of you touched on this earlier. Circular economy needs lawyers, they need accountants, they need marketers, they need supply chains people. So I think it's just great to see that, yes, of course, the circular role is needed, but also I think the end goal really should be that this is something that we're all thinking about all the time, no matter what our role is in the company. So with that, thank you so much to our speakers for joining us today. What an excellent conversation. So many resources shared, so many insights gone around. So we'll be circulating the recording in the coming week or so. And at that point, we'll also share some of the links we've mentioned, job boards, case studies, etc. So thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you again, speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.